You're now listening to Dark Matter with Michael Parker, right here on KarmaAir.com.
Greetings, truth seekers, paradigm busters, new world order, civil disobedience, freedom fighters, free thinkers, higher mammals, sentient beings, good people of all types. How's it going? My name is Michael Parker. It is Sunday, April the 6th. This is your Sunday night fix of Dark Matter, coming to you as always from an undisclosed location high above the Sunset Strip here in Hollyweird, California. We've got a really big shoe for you tonight, as Ed Sullivan used to say back in the day. Today's guest is going to be Mr. Lloyd Pye. He's going to be talking about the Starchild skull. He's going to be on here in about 15 to 20 minutes. Amazing stuff. I've met Mr. Pye a couple of times in the past, and I've seen the Starchild skull in person. Incredible material. That's what we'll be talking about today. But before we get to that, got a couple of interesting stories to bring to your attention. One is this thing, I just saw this yesterday, and this comes from an article by Roger Highfield. He's the science editor, I believe, for the Telegraph UK. It's about fossilized poo, fossilized feces, as it were. What's interesting about this is not to be gross, but it appears that these human feces that were found in a cave in Oregon, they were able to sequence some DNA out of this. And what's amazing about this is for the last couple of decades, we've all thought that the Clovis people were the first inhabitants of North America, that they came over from Siberia or Asia through the Bering Strait on, when the water was low. Well, that would have been 13,000 some odd years ago. This human excrement that was found, and some other fossils, these were found in caves. They were high, dry caves, which helped kind of save the material in its form. And it looks like the carbon-14 dating that they've done on this stuff takes it back to 14,300 years, and that's 1,200 years before the Clovis culture. So if this is what it seems to be, then once again, we've got to push back our ideas about humanity, about how we got here, about who the first Americans were. The DNA that's found in these specimens does seem to be DNA that would be found in Native Americans, but it also has some Asiatic content as well. So it's interesting because I have thought forever, as do a lot of the people that come on this show, is everything that we think we know, and to quote Mr. Lloyd Pye, everything you know is wrong. Everything that we talk about as far as humanity is, how old are we, where do we come from, how did we get here, really needs a big, big reexamination. And for those of you who believe that the earth is 6,000 years old and stuff like that, and man walked with dinosaurs, well, hey man, I cannot go there. That just seems crazy to me, especially when right here in front of us, we have fossilized excrement that's, 14,000 plus years old. But the most important thing here is that, listen, we don't know everything that we think we know about humanity, about civilization, about Homo sapiens, how we got here, where are we going. And when a discovery like this is made, it's now going to force us to push back the timeline for inhabitants coming into North America. Like I say, the Clovis people, that was what everybody was kind of going with. They came here 13,000 some odd years ago. Well, this pushes it back at least another 1,200 years. So they don't know who these people are. There's still further tests that have got to be done on these specimens. And there was also some thread and some bones and a few other things that were found in the site. But it's interesting to me because here again, we don't have all the answers. And even at this stage of the game, we're still finding out new things all the time. And who knows? I mean, if you're somebody who believes like Michael Cremo does, the writer of Forbidden Archaeology, who knows, man, humanity may have been here hundreds of thousands of years beyond what we think. It's all up in the air, and we're learning new things all the time. So this is just something that was just found and or actually just released. It was found several years ago, I believe. But, this is in North America. This is in Oregon. And even though it's kind of a gross subject, fossilized poo, it does tell us a little bit about ourselves and how we got here. And I think it's interesting. And the human mystery is something that we need to continue to contemplate. We need to continue to research because we do not have all the answers.
Hi, this is Emma Caulfield, and you're listening to Dark Matter with Michael Parker.
Welcome back, Truth Seekers. My name is Michael Parker. This is Dark Matter on KarmaAir.com. And for the remainder of today's program, we have got a mind blower of a show. Today, we welcome to the show Lloyd Pye. I've met Lloyd a couple of times over the last couple of years. I've actually got a copy of his book, Everything You Know Is Wrong, in front of me when I met him first back at Mutual at MUFON LA back in 1999. Lloyd Pye has written a couple of nonfiction books, including Everything You Know Is Wrong, and his latest book, The Starchild Skull, Genetic Enigma or Human Alien Hybrid. That is going to be the crux of our discussion today. And without further ado, Lloyd, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Michael. I'm very pleased to be here with you tonight.
I appreciate you taking time out to come on board here. And a lot of our viewers will know who you are and some of the story of the Starchild Skull. But I think let's just start from the beginning to get everybody fully in the groove here. Tell us a little bit, first of all, what this skull is and how you came to have it, because the story alone, just where this thing came from, still kind of breaks my heart in some ways.
Well, it's the Starchild skull is a real, true bone skull. There's no question about it being fabricated from parts like Piltdown Man or anything like that. It's legitimate, but it's malformed in unusual ways that make it seem not entirely human, not really human. It was found in about the 1930s, in the early 1930s, so we estimate around 1930, by a woman who at the time was just a teenager, 14, 15 years old, somewhere in there. She was of Mexican heritage, and her family had become citizens and during the time of her youth, and so they were going back to the home village in Mexico to visit for the first time since they had immigrated. So they took her and her siblings, and they went, and when they got to this village, it was about, and we don't know exactly where it was about 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua. That's all we know. It's pushing over near toward the Copper Canyon area, though, a deserty kind of mountainous region, kind of like, let's say, Arizona in the U.S., and they were told, the kids, don't go in the caves or the mine tunnels around here. It's forbidden. It's dangerous, and we just don't do it. Well, being a teenager, she snuck off to do just that, and she went into a into a mine tunnel, rather, in an isolated area. And in that mine tunnel, she said, she saw a human skeleton, full human skeleton, lying on its back. And she got a little closer, and she noticed that there was a mounded up area of dirt to the side, and coming out of that mounded up area of dirt was a skeleton hand, which she called misshapen, and that hand was wrapped around the upper arm bone of the human lying on its back on the dirt. So because it was in a mine tunnel, there had been no compaction of the soil from rain or anything like that, so she, using her hands, dug away the dirt and found another skeleton, another full skeleton, in the dirt, which she called misshapen as well. It was misshapen, the whole thing. And now, if we judge by the misshapenness of the skull, it was unusual. And she said it was significantly smaller than the one lying on the ground. And the one lying on the ground, we know by the size of its skull that it was about 5 feet tall, which is very, very average for Mexican people even to this day. So the one in the grave had to be in the range of 4 feet, we estimate. So she was able to, she tried to recover all the bones, but all she managed really to get was the two skulls. The story of that is explained in some detail in the book, so there's no point in going over it for anyone who really is interested, but she did manage to get the two skulls back into the country, and she didn't know what they were. She just kept them as souvenirs for the whole course of her life. So in the early 90s, she found out that she had a terminal illness, and she had to do something with her skulls. Her husband was never comfortable with them, and so because he had a job with the U.S. government, so she passed them on to some friends of hers, and they said they would take them, and they were just in a cardboard box and just she had them in her garage. They put them in their garage, and they kept them for 5 more years. But they weren't comfortable with 2 human skulls, they thought, either.
Understood.
So they had a pair of friends, Ray and Melanie Young in El Paso, and Melanie had been a neonatal nurse for some years and was very comfortable with the idea of deformity, they assumed, and so they figured, well, maybe Ray and Melanie would take these things off our hands and not feel weird about it.
Mm-hmm.
So they offered the skulls to them. Well, when Melanie saw the Starchild, what came to be known as the Starchild skull, she knew almost immediately this was not your standard routine human malformation. It had none of the hallmarks of a standard malformation. In fact, it was like nothing she'd ever seen before in a human, but she and her husband Ray were members of the El Paso MUFON group, Mutual UFO Network,
Mm-hmm.
so they were both very much wired up on aliens, alien life, and particularly grays. And they looked at each other and looked at that skull, and they said, geez, that skull could easily fit in the head of a gray because it had the hallmarks, it had all the physiological hallmarks of grays as grays are described by people who see them. And that would be a very small lower face, which the Starchild had. There's a piece of maxilla that went with the skull that proves that. Very small, lower jaw, lower everything in the face. A large swelling of the upper head and cranium, and in particular a crease. We've all heard the idea. The people say that they have like a crease in the top rear of their heads,
Mm-hmm.
and the Starchild has that. No human has that. The Starchild has that. Now, as far as what makes the Starchild skull unique and unusual, is a few things really stand out about it. More than anything else, probably, is the thickness of its bone is uniformly half of what it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Not an area of deformity that causes it to thin out. Like, for example, if you were to have hydrocephaly, water on the brain, where you get that upward pressure that causes the head to swell and thin out, the bone to thin out. Well, everything else that isn't affected is normal.
Mm-hmm.
Humans have a certain level of thickness to their bone. The Starchild, all over the place, all over it, is half as thick as it should be. It weighs half as much. It's very much lighter than normal human bone, than a normal human skull. And yet, it turned out later, as we were doing tests and it came time to cut the bone, to do samples, to take samples of it and do testing on it, it's much more durable than human bone. Much harder to cut, much tougher bone. Something about it makes it tougher, even though it's like saying an eggshell is as hard as a baseball. How did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
So it turns out that there are some fibers of some kind we found later through scanning electron microscopes. There are fibers woven into the matrix of the bone that no bone on Earth that we know of has that, and yet the Starchild has it.
Let's stop right there for just a second. You guys,
Sure.
if you're listening to us right now, or you're listening to this in a podcast over the next week or whatever, the website, it's crucial that you see this. Starchildproject.com is where you can see the pictures and some artist renditions of what the Starchild may look like based upon this bone structure. You can also go to LloydPye.com. That's LLOYDPYE.com, because it's crucial that you see this. I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead, Lloyd.
No, it's okay. They really should. Anybody listening should go to starchildproject.com, not necessarily now, but if you want to, if you can, go ahead. But there you will see a lot of photographs and photographic evidence of all the things that I'm talking about. You can see we've documented the testing process not only on the website but in the book as well as we can for the past 8 years. The book came out just last year, so it's very up to date. There's been nothing significant that's happened since the publication of the book because, frankly, we're waiting for an opportunity to do a final DNA test on it that will give us an understanding, or should be able to prove that the Starchild is in fact not entirely human. We know its father wasn't. We were able to determine that in 2003, but that is not enough for science to just have a DNA test that says one of its parents doesn't show up as a normal human. Well, that's saying something's wrong, but we don't know what's wrong. We don't know what that means.
Lloyd, hold on just a second, because I do want to talk about mitochondrial DNA and nuclear DNA. And I've seen you speak a couple of times on this. I've had the pleasure of meeting you twice, and I just want to make sure I've got this understood as well. Now, I know that the mitochondrial DNA, which you can talk about, shows the mother's side, but I was under the impression that the nuclear DNA had not been recovered yet, which would show us what the father's side was.
No, actually, that isn't exactly the case. The way it worked is when they went in to do the recovery of the DNA, it was very easy to recover. Both the human that was found with it. See, the thing about ancient DNA, it goes to this. If you want to have a paternity suit or you want to test the blood at a murder scene or something like that, that's all fresh, and it's very easy to do that. But when you want to recover DNA that's over 50 years old, that's called ancient DNA. It gets much more difficult because it's much more degraded. Well, the Starchild DNA and the human that was found with it, we carbon dated them to 900 years ago, plus or minus 40 years. Both of them done at separate times, both of them done at separate labs. And both of those labs coming back with exactly the same date, 900 years ago, plus or minus 40 years. What that tells you is the quality of the sample is not degraded. It's as if it was just put in a storage locker, a climate-controlled storage locker. It didn't degrade. So it's still like fresh DNA almost. So it was a good recovery when we went to recover the mitochondrial DNA and the nuclear DNA. Of the human being, they recovered her mitochondrial DNA, she was a female, and her nuclear DNA, very typical human being, haplogroup A, so not really a problem there. Everything good about her. Now with the Starchild's DNA, the mitochondrial DNA was recovered, but it was haplogroup C, which tells you that the human found with it was not its mother, because the mitochondrial DNA is passed on by the mother. So the Starchild's mother was from a different haplogroup than was the woman who died with it, who buried it and then died with it. So then it came time to recover its nuclear DNA. In 6 complete tries, they were unable to recover it. Now, by saying that implies, well, it's not there because it's degraded or something like that. But that's not really the case. It wasn't degraded. It was there. They knew it was there, and the fact that the mother's DNA was recovered so easily and so clearly on the first try tells you it's there. Its nuclear DNA is there. But in order to recover the nuclear package, the primers that are used for recovery have to recover both the mother and the father, because the two are combined in the nuclear DNA because it comes from the nucleus. Only the mother produces the mitochondrial DNA. The mother and the father produce the nuclear DNA. So what it meant was, because they had already recovered the mother's mitochondrial DNA, they knew it was there. But Dad's DNA was not responding to the human DNA primers. That in 6 tries. So that meant that Dad's DNA is not human. Dad's DNA is not entirely human. We know it's there. They knew it was there. They knew they should be recovering it if they had a primer that could access his DNA. And the primers are like strings of human DNA because it's all we know how to do. Now, we could have applied chimp DNA. We could have applied chimp primers, rather, to it. We could have applied gorilla primers to it. We could have applied anything, but that wouldn't have picked up either. You see what I mean? Dad's DNA, because we know Mom is human, we know half of it is sitting there ready to go. Dad's DNA was hanging it up.
So
six attempts. So
I'm sorry,
do you understand now?
So are we saying that? I understand that you've recovered the mitochondrial DNA or the DNA of the mother, and we understand that she's of a different haplogroup than the Starchild, so she's not the actual physical mother of this child. And I also understand that you've recovered some DNA of the Starchild, but you've not recovered the father's DNA. Is that because you're able to recover some DNA, but you can't match it to anything else? Or am I still misunderstanding?
Well, you have to understand what a primer is. It's kind of like a lock and key situation. What they do is they take strings of base pairs. There are roughly 3 billion base pairs in the human genome. Mm-hmm. What they do is they take a few hundred to a few thousand base pair chains, and they set them up like keys to go in locks. Mm-hmm. Now, you take a human primer for nuclear DNA that's going to have both male and female DNA in the key that has to go in the lock and is going to go find its complementary in that human DNA. Okay. And if it's human, it will lock up because there are certain strings, there are certain stretches of DNA that all human beings have in common. There are no changes with any of us. We're all about like 99% alike, so it isn't hard to find stretches that we all have in common, and that's where the primers come from. So if you've got an unknown DNA sample and you put in human primers, chimp primer, gorilla primer, rabbit primer, eventually you get your key goes in a lock and you know what the DNA sample is. Mm-hmm. If you're starting out with a known human sample and you're using human primers, the primers ought to go right in, lock up, just like it did with the human being found with the Starchild. They applied the primers to it. They went right in, boom, they found out normal human being, nothing odd about her, found her haplogroup, and that it was a female. So, because there are primers that you use to determine sex. Mm-hmm. So, when they tried to do that to the Starchild's DNA, the mitochondrial worked just fine, but the nuclear DNA primers did not work. They knew the mother's was working fine because they'd already recovered her mitochondrial DNA.
Understood.
Its dad's DNA is wrong for human primers. Dad is not human. Dad is not entirely human. He's not enough human for human primers to find and lock up on his DNA. So, what is he? That's what we have to answer before people will take the Starchild seriously, even though they should have been taking it very seriously since 2003, but nobody really wants the answer to this because of what it means.
Yes.
So we have to wait now, but there is a test that's been developed by a company called 454 Life Sciences in Connecticut, and that test is being applied to the Neanderthal genome, which is something that science very much wants to answer right now as we speak. And what they're doing is they're sequencing the Neanderthal's DNA on a base pair by base pair arrangement, meaning instead of just chunks of it like they have it for primers, they're recovering every single base pair. They have to in order to figure out what a Neanderthal's genome looks like because we've got nowhere to start with the Neanderthal. You see what I mean?
Yes.
There's no way to create a primer for a Neanderthal because you don't know what its DNA was like. You have to recover its entire genomic package, all 3 billion base pairs, and line up the differences and see where the differences are.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, if you can do that with the Neanderthal, you can do that with the Starchild, is what I'm saying. So the time will come, although not tomorrow, not maybe even next year, when the cost of that test, which right now is tremendous, and a couple $100,000 or more, and it takes a year or more to do it, the cost of that will drop and the time of that will drop. But that's a big job. Let's think for a minute. 3 billion base pairs, big job. Mm-hmm. So it's getting refined all the time. It's getting better all the time, and the price is going to go down. The time length is going to go down, and there will come a point where somebody's going to want to pony up the money to get the Starchild tested. And when that happens, then we will be able to find its whole genome, all 3 billion of its base pairs, and we know that roughly half of it's going to be its mother, and half it's going to be, or not half, but some percentage of it is going to be Dad. And there is where you're going to find out what Dad really was, and you're going to find out what the Starchild really was, and how far the Starchild is from a normal human. And that should be pretty doggone interesting, given that physiologically it is so incredibly different.
Welcome back, Truth Seekers. My name is Michael Parker. This is Dark Matter. Tonight we're speaking with Lloyd Pye. He has an anomalous skull in his possession, or he is the caretaker of. His website is www.starchildproject.com. In our last segment, we were talking about a lot of the DNA testing that the skull has undergone. And I guess in this segment, one of the things I want to talk about, and I do hope that you guys take a look at his website so you can see what we're talking about here. Lloyd, today when I was reading, I was like, in my mind, I was thinking, okay, what can we say that we know definitively about the skull? And there were several really strange things. Besides, I mean, just to look at the thing, it's obviously so incredibly odd, but I wanted you to tell a few people about some things, like the eyes, the eyeball sockets are not as deep, yet the inner ear is larger, and it seems like the neck is smaller. The thickness of the skull is half of what it would normally be, yet it's very durable. There's so many anomalies about this skull, and we know it's real. This is not a hoax, so this is not something that somebody put together, like you said, with a couple of bits and pieces, like a Piltdown thing. Let's talk a little bit about some of these anomalous aspects of the skull on a physical level.
Well, the ones that you mentioned are certainly key elements. The eye sockets in particular are extremely unusual in that they generally, no matter what kind of deformity you are, your eyes, no matter how deformed you are, your eyes maintain, your sockets maintain a certain physiology, with the optic nerves being at the rear, and no matter how they're skewed out of line, which they can be with, say, Crouzon's disease and others, but still your eyes are very durable as far as maintaining against distortion. These eye sockets are incredibly different from a normal human's, and yet they are equally incredibly symmetrical. They have been reformatted completely such that instead of going like a cone into the head of the Starchild, they're like a scoop out of the front of the face. And instead of all of the major functioning aspects of it, the optic nerve, the optic foramen, and all that being at the very rear of it, of the cone, it's down at the bottom and toward the center, toward the nose. Mm-hmm. So all that's been very much shifted and rearranged and realigned, and yet perfectly symmetrical on both sides, because you can look at the shallow scoops of the skull, look at it with your eyes, and you cannot see any shift in the terrain of the bone. It looks like like an ice cream scoop, dug it out. And yet, if you put your fingers in there and rub your fingers along the bone, you feel these subtle convolutions, these rises, ups and downs, and both of them are exactly the same. You can't see them, but your fingertips are sensitive enough to pick them up. Mm-hmm. And so that right there is just an incredible sign that this was not any kind of a deformity, because one of the hallmarks of deformity is that it's asymmetrical. Mm-hmm. It just makes it, lopsided and ugly, and it doesn't go about making something well aligned, and this is perfectly aligned. So there's that. There are those incredible eye sockets. Then, as you said, there are the inner ears, and the ears have been shifted down. The positioning of the ears have been shifted considerably away from where they would normally be, down into the front. But yet the inner ear inside is, in fact, significantly larger, about twice the size of what it should be. So that's significant in and of itself. Another factor is that the neck, the opening for the neck, the foramen magnum, has been shifted forward about a full inch, such that the head balances on the neck straight up and down. In a normal human being, the neck is considerably to the rear of the center point, because the front of our faces are very hollow, and so to balance off, it's like a fat kid and a skinny kid on a seesaw. You need the skinny kid has to go much further out to make it balance. So it's sort of like that, with the front of our faces needing more space in front to balance out the weight of the rear of our heads, so our necks are to the rear. With the Starchild, it's its face is completely different from ours. It has no sinuses, no frontal sinuses, nothing up in there to take up any space. It has those very shallow eye sockets, has a very small lower face and mouth and all that. Everything's much smaller, much reduced, and it has that very big rear of the head. So the shifting is such that the head sits directly on the neck like a weird-shaped golf ball on a golf tee, which is very different from human beings. Also, the way the muscles attach around the neck show us that the neck itself was only about half the thickness of a human neck, about half. Its neck was about half the size of ours. So that's very unusual. Now, here's one that's one of my favorites. If you reach around, and if everybody that's listening to my voice right now reaches around to the rear of your own head, to the rear center of your own head, sort of kind of down at the bottom, right where your skull meets your neck, you're going to feel a knot back there. That's called the external occipital protuberance, or the inion for short. Now, every human being, every chimp, every gorilla, every monkey, every primate has that, because that is where some big muscles that attach your head to your neck go. And they're there as a buttressing agent. And not only do you have a knot like that on the outside of your skull, you have one on the inside of your skull, because that is acting as part of the mechanism that holds your cerebellum in place. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the external occipital protuberance, that knot, the inion, is universal with primates, including us. With the Starchild, does not exist, does not have one, not at all. And not only does it not have a bump back there, it has an indentation there. That bone is indented rather than bumped out. Incredibly different.
Yes.
The neck, of course, does not attach on it. The neck attaches much further down, right around, in fact, the foramen magnum itself. So that is what would make that go away? What would make something so fundamental to primate physiology disappear? What kind of malformation would do that, and yet still have it be an absolutely perfectly circular dent? It's like everything else, it's very symmetrical. And all this means, really, Michael, is that it's the Starchild's genes were telling it to grow this way. Things grow the way they do because genes tell them to do it. Now, if your genes give a bad message, you get a deformity. If a gene is fouled up, you get a deformity. And we human beings have over 2,000 known genetic deformities. So it isn't that we don't have plenty of them, but though they show themselves, if they're a genetic deformity, they show themselves consistently to be of a certain kind. Then you have birth defects where it's just a single one-time sperm-egg misconnect. A lot of things go wrong and still something gets born. But it's a one-time only. It's never been before. It's never going to be again. Congenital birth defects, it can happen. Those happen as well. Generally, they die. Generally, they're stillborn. They die shortly after birth. They're all screwed up. But it's always asymmetrical and not good. Somehow the Starchild came out in really good shape, able to live at least to 5 years old and conceivably to 500 years old, because we don't know how old it was when it died. Wow. We do know that its teeth that were found in the little piece of maxilla looked like baby teeth, although they were extremely well worn. So that's hard to figure. And also there were teeth waiting to come down in the maxilla, which indicated at first that it was a child. That was the first word we got. Well, if you got teeth up in the maxilla, it's going to be a child, and so we called it a Starchild. But we don't know that it was a child. We don't know what it was. We just know that it lived long enough, if it was a child, to erupt its teeth and to wear the heck out of them. So we figure 5, 6 years old.
So Lloyd, you're saying now that we've kind of revised our ideas that because I know for a long time you were generally in agreement that the Starchild was approximately 5 to 6 years old, but now you're saying that we really actually don't know that.
Right. Later evidence, Michael, you're right. When we first got the word from the first testing that was done on it, which was X-rays and analysis by dentists, they said, well, if ipso facto, if a human maxilla has teeth up in the top of it and teeth already in place, even though these teeth that are in place don't look like baby teeth. Baby teeth don't get worn because they're not in there long enough to be really worn down hard. You see what I mean?
Yes.
And yet the Starchild's teeth were clearly worn down. They had received some really hard use. You can look at the pictures on the website or in the book, and you can see that. The enamel is cracked. It's crazed. So those teeth got some real hard use. And yet there are sitting those teeth up in the maxilla waiting to come down. So based on what we know about human beings, that indicates a child. So they said it's probably a child. And so we went with that for a long time. But later we began to have other specialists weigh in on it, and they would say, you just can't get that kind of wear on a child's teeth because, number one, they don't have them in their mouths for that long, and it takes a long time to wear teeth down like that. And number two, it takes a lot of torque, it takes a lot of stress, it takes a lot of strength cracking down on hard things to crack the enamel, to craze the enamel that way.
So maybe this thing actually has more than 2 sets of teeth in its lifetime.
Exactly. It could have 2 or 3 or 4 or more. It could be like shark teeth.
Holy cow.
Maybe it has a 500-year lifespan, and it needs 3 or 4 or 5 sets of teeth, and it just grows them as it needs them. We can't say yes or no that isn't true. So it is a possibility.
Wow. We're speaking with Lloyd Pye. We're talking about the Starchild skull. We're going to take a quick break. Lloyd, when we left off in that last segment, we were talking still about some of these incredible abnormalities of the skull. And what people need to understand also is, I know that initially a lot of people tried to argue that this was, and I can't remember the phrase, it's not waterboarding, but
cradle-boarded.
Cradle-boarding.
Yeah.
Yes, and go ahead. And this is not what this is.
No, generally when we would show it to specialists at first, they would just take it, flip it over, look at the back and see that the head looked fairly flat, and that the upper parietals were kind of swollen out or extended out a bit from normal, and they'd say, oh, it's a cradle-boarded hydrocephalic, which is just a knee-jerk answer to someone who doesn't want to be bothered to look at it, even though when they feel it in their hands, they'd know right away this is not normal, and they would be just trying to get us out. Oh, don't worry about this. It's a cradle-boarded hydrocephalic. Just forget about it. Go home and never darken our door again kind of thing.
Yes.
But the way it works is the human that was found with the Starchild is indeed and is in fact a cradle-boarded skull. Now, what it is, and it has a distinctive look about it too. A true cradle-boarded skull comes from a number of primitive societies. There's nothing unusual about it at all. A baby is born into this culture, and the mother has to work very, very diligently from sun up to sundown, basically out in the fields and doing the different things that women in primitive societies have to do because they do most of the work. So the babies have to be strapped down and put on their backs or carried in slings in various other ways. But imagine the Indian papoose, the American Indian papoose kind of thing, where the baby is tied onto a board and put on the mother's back, and the head of the baby is strapped to the board because the baby's head is the biggest part of its body pretty much except for the torso, and its neck is very slender at that time, and the head can be snapped around and the head will be injured while the mother is stooping over and doing her work. So the head is strapped to the board. Well, because the baby's head is so soft, the bones in the skull are so soft at that point, they flatten out. They take the shape of the board. So all children that have that done to them when they're, as infants, they come up with a flat spot in the back of their head about the size of the palm of your hand. But just like you see in the human skull that was found with the Starchild, but it always stops at that knot at the back of your head called the inion. It never goes beyond that point. Why does that knot never get flattened? Because that's where the neck is. And so in order for that to happen, the neck muscles would have to be detached from that point, and you'd create all kind of damage. So the flattening of the human skull that's been cradle-boarded always stops just above the inion. Well, with the Starchild, the flattening goes right straight down to the neck hole, right down to the foramen magnum. And also, too, in a normal human cradle-boarded, the flattening of the skull, of the bone, it's as flat as a piece of glass. It's as flat as the piece of wood that the skull was flattened against.
Mm-hmm.
It is flat as a pool table. Well, with the Starchild, you can look at the pictures or you can feel it with your hand. It has perfectly normal convolutions in the bone, little ridges and bumps and nubs that, just show that it was never cradle boarded. It didn't flatten out because it got flattened by hands. Its genes told it to grow that way. That's how it grew. And if its genes told it to grow that way, and it's told its neck to do what it did, and its eye sockets to do what it did, and the crease in the top of the head, it's just not human.
Right.
But more importantly, as far as the hydrocephalic part of it, the water on the brain part of it, that crease right there. I mean, a moron can look at that and say, okay, well, that can't be that can't be hydrocephaly because water on the brain, pressure on the brain, abnormal pressure on the brain that's going to swell the skull out to that degree is not going to selectively press up on the left side of the parietal and selectively press up on the right side of the parietal and somehow leave that crease in the middle untouched. Not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if a moron can figure that out, these specialists know that what they're saying to me is total garbage.
That was going to be my next question.
Probably 50 of them, and there are some of them that'll insist it even to this day. They'll see the pictures, cradle-boarded hydrocephalic. I just get tired of dealing with them. They're unbelievably ignorant if they think I'm going to buy that, or anybody that knows any facts about it at all are going to buy that. The first time I heard it, I did buy it. I got to tell you, the first time I heard it, okay, yeah, because I didn't know any better. I was ignorant at that point of the facts. But as soon as I did a little research, I found out, they were just shining me on, trying to shut me up and get rid of me.
Let me ask.
So from that point on, I was aware of what was being done to me every time it was being done to me, and it was done quite often.
Well, Lloyd, let me ask you this, because this sounds like a lot of the things we talk about on this show. It sounds like, your typical Egyptologist talking about certain, artifacts in Egypt and things. But let me ask you this. These guys, of all the people that have looked at this, scientists and doctors and specialists, are there any who've confidentially said to you, Lloyd, you know what? I am at a loss to explain this, and perhaps this is, in fact, what you believe that it is, and that it's possibly extraterrestrial or partially alien in its origin. Has anyone said that to you?
Yes, a few have, actually. The main one probably is Dr. Ted Robinson, and we talk about him in the book quite a bit, and one of his final report is documented as one of the indexes. But Dr. Ted Robinson was a craniofacial plastic surgeon in Vancouver, British Columbia, for about 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he was getting close to retiring, and, he didn't have anything to lose, and so he just said, yeah, I'm with you on this. I know that this, he says, I've never seen anything like it. Give me 6 weeks. I'm going to research it out, and I'm going to see if I can find anything in the literature approaching what you have here.
Mm-hmm.
6 weeks later, no go. Can't find a thing like it. I think you're right. I think, and he became a real advocate. Another guy, Dr. Joseph Smith, who was retiring from New Orleans Children's Hospital. He's the one who did the CAT scan and some other things, and he too got behind it. But Joseph Smith, in the end, even he would not definitively say it can't be anything human, but he was very helpful. Then there was a guy in England named Dr. Kenneth Pye, no relation to me, ironically. That's where my family name comes from, is England. And he was also, because he owned his own laboratory and he didn't need to kowtow to anybody, he was able to stand up and say what he thought about it. So there have been a few. But by and large, they are just terrified of putting their names onto something that has to do with aliens or UFOs, because they know that is a ticket to excommunication from their religion, which is mainstream science.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that is their only fear, or do you think that some of them, that an idea that we do have proof of an extraterrestrial, not only is it career suicide, but do you think in some cases it just shakes the faith of these people so badly that they just can't deal with it, or is it mostly just they're worried about their careers?
There may be some cases like that, Michael, but frankly, I think the ones that would see it, they would sit there and tell me, "Oh, no, it's a cradle board at Hydrus Valley. Don't worry about it. Adios." And probably would go home to their wife or significant other, whoever, and say, "Honey, you won't believe what I saw today." That kind of thing. I don't think it's a situation where they are afraid of anything other than peer pressure, peer disapproval, because it's Churchill's great line: "History is a fable agreed upon."
Yeah.
It's just history is a fable agreed upon. We all are going to agree that this is what the history of the situation is, even though we know it's a lie.
Right.
Well, it's sort of the same thing with science. It's a fable agreed upon. They don't know. They don't want this to be the case, because as soon as UFOs and aliens are reality, it just changes the landscape of reality so much for us as human beings here on Earth. Nobody wants that to happen on their watch.
Yes.
If they can avoid it. If they can't avoid it, they're going to deal with it. In other words, if the Starchild, we were to prove it out tomorrow, we get up and announce it. It's everywhere. The Starchild is a real, true alien artifact. Relic, no problem, no question. Everybody's going to work. Everybody's going to do the same thing.
Agreed.
It isn't going to be this thing where people are running out in the streets and tearing their hair out and shooting themselves in the head so the aliens won't get them. And that's all this stuff that they came to believe because of the radio program that Orson Welles did of War of the Worlds back in the 1920s, 30s.
Mm-hmm.
It was a much less wired-in time, and there weren't sci-fi movies and things like that. This scared the holy heck out of people.
Sure.
And they had a right to go react the way they did. They had nothing in their background to prepare them for it. Now we've got Star Wars. Nobody's going to go nuts if they announce that aliens are real or UFOs are real or anything like that.
That's been my contention for a long time.
Yeah, it affects the power base of the government. That's what they don't want. They don't want people saying, "Well, wait a minute. I don't have to listen to you anymore. I want to deal with the big boss. You're not the big boss anymore. I want to talk to the big boss. And I'm not paying my taxes to you. I'll pay taxes maybe to the big boss, but not to you." Their problem's unending when that happens. They think. I don't think it's going to be that bad at all. It's going to happen. Sooner or later, it may not be in our lifetimes, but eventually the reality of UFOs and the reality of alien life and all the evidence is so dominant around us in the megalithic structures around the world. Now, this gets more into my other book, Everything You Know Is Wrong. But
which, by the way, I want to have you on so we can do a show on that as well, because we've not done a lot of stuff on Sasquatch, Yeti, hominids, and megaliths. So I would love to have you back on in the next month or two so we could talk about that as well.
Well, certainly that's something we can talk about. The problem there is, unfortunately, I don't have that book's out of print, and I need to get it back in print before I do any more radio shows about it. Because I did one time a few months ago, and I'm still getting calls from people wanting to get the book, and they can't get it. Very mad at me, and I don't blame them. That was stupid of me to do that. So I'm going to wait until I can get a revised version of that book back available, because now the only copies, the used copies, are going for like $100, and that's just absurd. I don't want anybody paying that kind of money for a used book of mine. There are about 30,000 copies out there. Somebody ought to be able to. You ought to have a friend that's got one you can borrow or something, I would think.
I've got one right in front of me.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I need to get on that, but I got so much else going on. It's just really hard to do at the moment. But I will, and when I have the book, where it's available again, then I certainly will do, hopefully, a lot of radio shows about it to let people know that they can get a revised and updated version of it.
I understand. We're speaking with Lloyd Pye. We're talking about the Starchild skull. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I am going to ask Lloyd to hypothesize, and we're going to talk about perhaps the life of this Starchild, whomever it is, wherever it came from, how it lived. And you've heard a lot about the physical aspects of the skull. Now we're going to extrapolate a little bit further out on who this might have been and how they might have lived. Lloyd, I want to spend a little bit of time now trying to, and I know that this is going to be largely hypothetical, or maybe you actually have some information, or maybe you've spoken with some intuitives. Let's talk a little bit about this story and try to figure out what we think, or what you think happened here, because the Starchild is buried alongside this female who is not the Starchild's mother, yet obviously they are close in some way. What do you think was going on? And of course, before we thought the Starchild was definitely a small child. Now we don't really know what the age of the Starchild is. I know that there's been some organic or inorganic testing of it that showed that the Starchild possibly had a different diet and different water from the mother. What do you think went on in the Starchild's life that we can figure out with the limited amount of information that we have?
Well, it's a very good question, and there are a number of possibilities having to do with whether or not it was a child or whether it was an adult, and what age adult it would be. Was it a young adult? Was it an old adult?
Mm-hmm.
Was it a superannuated adult?
Yep.
And we don't know any of that. So it becomes really hard to speculate without knowing that. The few things that we do know that we can certainly assume is that woman found with the Starchild in the mine tunnel, whoever she was, we know she wasn't its biological mother, and we don't know if the Starchild, by the way, was male or female. But so we just have to call it an it. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We know it wasn't its mother for sure. But was it a guardian? Was it a child with a guardian? Don't know. Was it a lover? Was it a close friend? It was somebody who cared an awful lot, because that person, whoever they were, when the Starchild died, they schlepped the body. We assume now, could have killed it in the mine tunnel, could have happened there, but we think the Starchild probably died somewhere away. We don't know, certainly wasn't a head injury, but we don't know, could have been a disease or accident, or we don't know what, but the Starchild died, we think. And that woman, whoever she was, didn't want the body found, didn't want the body located by somebody. So she took it to this isolated mine tunnel, and she buried it in the loose rubble on the floor of the mine tunnel. And then she, according to the girl, there were no clothes on the skeleton, so she stripped herself, and she laid down beside it, and she had left the hand sticking out on purpose. She buried it, but she left its hand sticking out. She laid down, she put her arm in, she wrapped its hand sticking out of the grave around her own upper arm, and then she killed herself. So whether she took poison and just laid down and waited for the poison to take effect, or slit her own wrists, or cut her own throat, or however she did it, that woman laid down and died with the Starchild. So that's a very tragic and romantic story just right there, just trying to figure out what would compel her to do that. What level of devotion or what level of fear? Maybe by knowing that she took the body where nobody could find it, she would be killed for doing that, so I'm just going to kill myself here, kind of thing. We don't know, but it's a fascinating area for speculation, because it's about as dramatic a scene as you can concoct.
I'll say, and it's weird because I heard you first speak on this subject in 1999. I was at the MUFON LA meeting when you gave this lecture, and it always touched me. The whole thing is epic and incredible, but this particular human part of the drama just blows my mind. And I'd always kind of gone by the assumption, okay, well, maybe if it is in fact a child, then perhaps they were coming back to get the child or something, and she just couldn't break her relationship with this child. So you're pretty sure that the Starchild either died before going in there, or she killed the Starchild once in the cave. Is that correct?
Either of those two are possible.
Okay.
She could have carried the body in when it had died at some other place, or she could have decided, I'm not going to let them come get it, and I'm going to, Now let's keep this in mind. There is one factor that we haven't mentioned, which is important. The human being had suffered a pretty severe concussion to her left cranial, up the side of her head. If you look in the pictures, you can see it on the website and in the book. You can see the fracturing of her skull. It isn't caved in so that you have a real severe concussion, but it's a pretty bad concussion. And where it is the kind that could have caused her to go nuts. So instead of it being a very romantic thing, it could be she was a crazy woman. And she killed it and drugged the body in, or she enticed it to go in the cave, into the mine tunnel with her, rather, and then she killed it. There are any number of scenarios that are possible, and that's one of them.
Forensically, are we able to tell if that injury that she sustained happened close to the time of the death?
It was a healed concussion. It wasn't a fresh one. In other words, there was some knitting in the bone where you could see that it wasn't just a fresh crack.
I mean, there's a possibility that they were both persecuted. Now the fact that you tell me that we don't know exactly how old it is, man, that opens a whole other can of worms, because perhaps this was some emissary that had been with these people just God knows what happened here. That's
right, exactly that. It opens things up quite a bit. Also, what opens things up is how genetic engineering it works. People need to understand that when we say that the Starchild is a human-alien hybrid, everybody makes the assumption that means that there was a sexual union to produce it as a hybrid result of an alien having sex with a human being. That is not necessarily the case at all. It could be just as likely that it was an in vitro fertilization, and that it was implanted by people like we could do this right now. If we can do it, surely they could do it, where you create a hybrid using a small percentage of one species DNA and have the bulk of it be the other species DNA. In other words, even now, people think, well, a hybrid, it means it's 50% of one species and 50% of the other species. Doesn't work like that. You right now are not 50% your father, 50% your mother. It's can shade 60-40, 65-35, 70-30. You can be much more like your dad than you are like your mom.
Understood.
It's how it all lines up at the moment of conception. So as far as a hybrid goes, if you do it in a genetics lab, you can take like 95% of one species, and the other species has 5% of what you want or need or want it to have. You can put that in there, and you've got a hybrid that'll show up human. Like the Starchild could have been 95% alien, 5% human, but its mitochondrial DNA is going to show up as 100%. That its mother was human, because that's where the mitochondrial DNA is going to come from. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So we don't know that. If you look at the Starchild's physiology, I'm willing to bet pretty serious money that it isn't very much human at all. Wow. And that's why I believe that when we can sequence its entire genome, all 3 billion base pairs, that Dad is going to come up so far away, and that the Starchild is going to come up so far away from human, that there is absolutely no doubt that it was an alien. Right now, chimp DNA comes in at about 3% different from human being, right? There are about 300, I think, genes out of 20,000 something that are questionable, but it isn't the majority by any stretch. There are some that are questionable, but when you are able to find 97% of human DNA in a chimp and 95 in a gorilla, we are grounded here. A lot of our DNA is here. That doesn't mean, by the way, that the human genotype is not common all in other places as well. In other words, that we're not all sort of alike. Even if you take the scene in Star Wars, in the bar, we have all those different species. If you were to line them all up and pull up their DNA, they might have, everybody in that room might have 60, 70, 80% the same. See what I mean?
Yes.
I think that life is ubiquitous, and I think that the majority of life is ubiquitous everywhere. I don't think it's possible that it's been created multiple times in multiple places. It's too complex. It's just too complex, and it's too flexible. and it's too able to adapt to different environments and different situations. I think it's a one-shot, one-off thing. I don't know how it came to be, but I don't see it as happening naturally, and I don't see it happening multiple times. I think it was done right the first time for whatever, for what the function is, which is this stuff is going to be able to endure anywhere, under any circumstances we put it under, and that's, I think, how it works.
We're speaking with Lloyd Pye. We are talking about the Starchild skull. And Lloyd, let me ask you this. So are you saying, because I agree with you that life is ubiquitous, but let me make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you talking about the human form, or are you just talking about life, period, of all types?
I'm talking about the genome, the genetics of life, how
Okay.
life functions.
Yeah.
The structure of base pairs into genes and genes into chromosomes. That basic fundamental blueprint of life, I think that is what's ubiquitous. I think you find that anywhere you're going to find life, you're going to find that it's created, it's composed of base pairs that are formed into genes that are formed into chromosomes. It's too complicated to just have sprouted. It just couldn't do that.
I agree with that.
I think it's engineered, and I think it was engineered for a purpose to be able to exist anywhere under any circumstances, and it really does. If you look at the simple bacteria that came to the earth and how they were capable and still are of living in every kind of environment you can imagine, the
like
hottest,
panspermia,
coldest, the saltiest, the driest, you name it, something's living there and doing just fine.
Mm-hmm.
They're capable. Life is ubiquitous, and it's capable of living anywhere under any circumstances. You just spray it out there and let it go to work, and I think that's where all of the alien types have come from, because somebody seeded it out there and let it go, and in the different environments, what survives in that environment survives. In other words, when Earth was just forming, they came here, I think, cosmic dump trucks just dumped out a load of it and, let it go to work. And periodically they come back and they see how things are going and they add what can be added at that particular time. I think personally that we're all just sort of part of a big ant farm, so to speak, where something is sort of governing us all the time.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you as well. At the beginning of the show today, I mentioned this article, and you probably saw it. Did you see this thing about these coprolites, this human feces that was found in these caves up in Oregon?
That's all just a bunch of crap.
No pun intended.
Gotcha.
But
Gotcha.
well, yeah, you did. Well, I mean, comment on that, because I would agree with you that the traditional view of humanity and evolution is not correct. But what would you say about this article? I mean, I would say that we've probably been in North America long before even 14,000 years, possibly.
Absolutely. That is it. There is so much evidence that we have been here many thousands of years before. But everybody that comes out with evidence that indicates otherwise is just silenced. Mm-hmm. Everybody remembers what happened to Virginia Steen McIntyre, I think her name was. This can be looked up, but she was the woman, young anthropologist who went to South America and found evidence of settlement 20, 30, 40,000 years ago, way back. And it couldn't be allowed. She was run out of town on a rail, run out of her job. I mean, and those few examples, it doesn't take many examples of people like her being made an example by by their peers, that you cannot step that far out of line, and then it becomes like a law, even though people know that it isn't the case. And that is what I think this is all a part of. It's going to eventually turn out that human beings have been in North America thousands of years.
Yep.
Thousands of years before. Remember, it used to be 10,000 years. Now it's 12,000 years. Now they're pushing it even more. The problem is the farther back you go, the less likely they're able to pin it to the land bridge. And that's what they want to hold on to, is the land bridge, so that it's all done very naturally and they don't have to have any hard explanations for how humans could have gotten here across the oceans without a land bridge. because that's something they cannot answer short of being flown over. And, they are doing sailing ships that would come over, and they just can't make that work.